In a small diner glowing faintly against the storm's relentless roar, Katie, a weary waitress with a heart shaped by loss and quiet struggles, poured coffee for strangers night after night. Her feet ached from double shifts, her mind heavy with worries about her son's next doctor's bill. But when a soaked, silent old man stepped through the door, carrying nothing but a worn backpack and a weight no one could see, something stirred in her. She didn't know his name, his story, or why his eyes held a flicker of forgotten pride. All she knew was the ache of being unseen and the power of a single, simple act. What happened next wasn't just a moment. It was a movement that brought a parking lot to life with the rumble of 500 motorcycles, all for a man the world had forgotten. Stay with us, because this is a story about kindness that echoes louder than thunder. The storm battered the windows of Darla's diner, a relentless downpour that turned the world outside into a blur of gray and silver. Rain pounded the glass, each drop racing to the sill, while the neon sign flickered, casting a dim glow across the puddles in the parking lot. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and warm pie, a haven for locals seeking quiet and comfort. Katie stood behind the counter, a worn towel draped over her shoulder, her hands moving mechanically to wipe down the surface. Her feet throbbed from her third double shift that week, and her patience was fraying at the edges, stretched thin by exhaustion and worry. She glanced at the clock, still hours to go before she could collapse at home. Her son's asthma treatments were a constant weight on her mind, the bills piling up faster than her tips could cover. Some days it came down to choosing between gas for the car or groceries for the week. She didn't complain, though, not to her coworkers, not to the customers, and certainly not to the stranger who shuffled through the door just after 8. The bell above the door barely jingled as he entered, hesitant, like he was trying not to disturb the air. His jacket was soaked through, heavy with rainwater, and his gray hair clung to his forehead in damp streaks. A battered backpack sagged over one shoulder, darkened by the storm. He didn't look around for a table or ask for a menu. He just sank into a two-seater by the coat rack, his movements slow, deliberate, as if he carried more than just the weight of his wet clothes. Katie caught Jerry's eye through the kitchen pass-through. The manager's face was already set in a scowl, his voice low but sharp. "Keep an eye on him. We don't need trouble tonight." Katie didn't respond. She grabbed a mug from the stack, filled it with coffee, and walked over, her steps soft against the linoleum. She set the cup down gently in front of the man, who looked up, not startled, just weary, his eyes heavy with a tiredness that went deeper than the storm. "I'm not ordering," he said, his voice low, almost lost in the patter of rain. "I don't have—" "You can stay until the rain stops," Katie said, her tone soft but firm. "Coffee's on me." He didn't speak for a moment, just looked at her as if kindness was a language he'd forgotten. Then he nodded once, a small gesture that carried the weight of years without warmth. A regular at the counter, a man who always ordered the same pie and black coffee, muttered under his breath, loud enough for Katie to hear, "Let strays in and you'll lose real customers." She ignored him, her hands moving over the counter, wiping away invisible crumbs. The man wrapped both hands around the mug, sipping slowly, like he was drawing heat from a dying fire. The rain grew heavier, hammering the roof, and the neon sign outside buzzed faintly, its light dancing across the wet asphalt. No one noticed the single motorcycle parked at the far edge of the lot, just beyond the glow of the streetlights. Not yet. Katie's life hadn't always been this grind. She'd grown up with a father who gave more than he had, a man who ran a small hardware store and never let anyone walk away empty-handed. "If someone's cold, give them something warm," he'd say, whether it was a coat from the rack or just a moment of his time. He died 3 years ago, heart failure, and the loss still sat heavy in Katie's chest, a grief she couldn't voice. Now she poured everything into keeping a roof over her head and medicine in her son's inhaler. She didn't talk about it, didn't let the weight show, but when she saw someone struggling, someone overlooked, it stirred something in her, not anger, but a quiet, aching resolve. That's what she felt when she looked at the man, sitting silently, asking for nothing but a moment out of the rain. Wasn't that all anyone wanted, really? A brief shelter from the storm? Jerry paced by again, his eyes locked on the man like he was a threat waiting to happen. "If he starts asking for food, cut him off," he said, his voice clipped. This isn't a charity, Katie. She didn't answer, just added a splash of coffee to the man's mug as she passed. He looked up, offering the smallest nod. No smile, no words, just a flicker of gratitude that said, "You see me." The storm outside roared louder, thunder rattling the forks on the tables. Katie suggested closing early, but Jerry waved her off. "Rain brings people in," he said. "More tables, more tips." Except no one came. Just the old man, still nursing his coffee, still silent. When he got up to use the restroom, Katie noticed his slow, uneven steps, the way his knee buckled slightly, forcing him to lean against the wall for support. When he returned, his booth was gone, taken by a young traveler, soaked and impatient, who'd claimed the seat without a glance. The old man didn't protest. He just stood there, clutching his wet backpack, looking for another place to sit. There wasn't one. There wasn't. Katie crossed the room, her voice gentle. "You're welcome to sit at the counter." He hesitated, his eyes flickering with doubt. "I don't want to be in the way." "You're not," she said. "Come on." She guided him to the last stool at the far end of the counter, but Jerry was already there, his patience gone. "That's enough, Katie," he snapped. "He's been here over an hour. You want to take him home?" "Fine, but not on my floor." Katie stepped between them, her voice steady. "He hasn't asked for anything. He's drinking coffee and staying dry, just like anyone else." Jerry's jaw tightened, his voice rising. "People are noticing, and you're not the one paying the bills." The regulars at the counter stared into their mugs, pretending not to listen, but their silence was loud. The old man reached for his bag, his voice barely audible. "It's fine. I'll go." "No," Katie said, turning to him. "You're not doing anything wrong." He paused, then met her eyes. "Most places don't let me stay long," he said softly. "You didn't have to speak up." Then quietly, like a confession, he added, "Thank you, Katie." She froze. She hadn't told him her name. It was nearly midnight when the first headlight cut through the rain-soaked parking lot. Katie was refilling napkin holders, trying to drown out Jerry's words in her head. The old man sat at the counter, hands still wrapped around his mug, as if it anchored him to the world. Then she saw it, a single motorcycle parked far out in the lot, just beyond the streetlight's reach. The rider sat still, helmet on, engine off. 5 minutes later, there were 3 bikes. Jerry noticed too, his brow furrowing as he peered through the window. "What the hell," he muttered. "They better not be drunk." Katie leaned over the counter, calling out through the door. "Can I help you folks with something?" One rider raised a gloved hand, steady and calm. "No trouble, ma'am. We're just waiting." "Waiting for what?" she asked. He didn't answer. She turned back to the counter, and her heart skipped. The old man was gone. She checked the restroom. Empty. Then the front door creaked, and she saw him step out into the storm, moving as if the rain didn't touch him. He crossed the lot, slow but steady, toward the bikes. The riders stood motionless, then one by one they removed their helmets. No words, no salutes, just nods, heavy with respect. A tall man with a gray beard and broad shoulders stepped forward, his leather jacket marked with the vet's MC patch. "You all right, brother?" he asked. The old man looked up, his voice quiet but clear. "She let me sit when no one else would." The tall man turned toward the diner, his eyes finding Katie through the rain-streaked glass. He nodded once, a gesture that carried more weight than words. By morning, the parking lot was a sea of chrome and leather, 500 motorcycles, their riders standing silent, every one of them there for the man who'd sought shelter from the storm. Rain streaked the diner's windows, blurring the world outside into a haze of gray and shadow. Katie stood behind the counter, her hands steady despite the ache in her legs from a double shift. Her eyes caught a flicker of movement through the glass, a lone figure hunched against the storm. Charlie, soaked to the bone, paused at the door. Their gazes met, his weary but steady, hers kind but cautious. He gave a single nod, no smile, just acknowledgement, then stepped inside, bringing the scent of wet asphalt with him. Within half an hour, the parking lot transformed. Motorcycles rolled in, first a handful, then a dozen, then more than Katie could count. Some riders were drenched, their leathers glistening under the diner's neon sign. Others, arriving from shorter rides, were dry but no less determined. They didn't enter, didn't knock, didn't make a scene. They simply arrived, parking with precision, filling every space, spilling onto the shoulder and even the sidewalk. Discipline radiated from their silence, a quiet purpose that pressed against the diner's walls. Inside, tension coiled. Jerry, the manager, paced near the office, his phone pressed to his ear. "I'm calling the sheriff," he muttered, his voice tight with suspicion. Katie grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "Look outside, Jerry. Really look." Her eyes burned with conviction. "I see exactly what's happening." For once, Jerry's usual sharp retort didn't come. The storm had softened, rain now a gentle patter, like fingertips tapping the glass. But outside, the rumble of engines grew, a low, steady pulse that seemed to hum with meaning. No one in the diner spoke. Regulars, some of whom had whispered judgments about the stray in the corner earlier, now sat frozen, their coffee cooling. Katie watched through the blinds, her heart thudding. Jerry, still clutching his phone, muttered, "I don't know what they want. There's got to be 50 of them now." His words cut off as the door swung open. Charlie stepped back inside, his jacket dripping anew, but he didn't approach the counter. He stood still, waiting. Behind him came a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and a leather vest adorned with faded patches. Vets MC, Southeast Chapter, and Striker. He peeled off his gloves, stepped forward, and extended a hand to Katie. "You're Katie?" His voice was gravelly but warm. "Upamedbirn." She nodded, uncertain. "You gave him coffee, a place to sit. No questions." She shrugged, glancing at Charlie. He looked tired. Stryker turned to the crowd outside, his presence commanding. "His name's Charlie, retired staff sergeant, combat engineer, 2 tours. Jerry's voice broke in, sharp with confusion. "What's that got to do with anything?" Stryker's gaze shifted, steady and unflinching. "He saved 5 of us. Kandahar, 2006. Pulled a crushed Jeep off a man with just a crowbar and sheer will." He looked back at Katie. Charlie vanished a few years back. PTSD, cut his number, disappeared. We've been searching ever since. Katie's eyes found Charlie's. He offered a faint smile, fragile but real, as if a piece of himself long buried had begun to surface. Stryker placed an envelope on the counter. "This is for you." Katie opened it, her breath catching at the stack of cash in mud alongside a folded note. "For the one person who saw him as a man, not a mistake," Stryker said. Her throat tightened. "I can't take this." Stryker's eyes softened. "You already earned it." Jerry opened his mouth, then closed it, silenced by the weight of the moment. Outside, more bikes rolled in, their engines hushed, moving with the reverence of a procession. They came for Charlie, a man they'd never stopped searching for, and for Katie, who'd offered him a seat when no one else would. Katie slid into a back booth, the envelope beside her untouched plate. Charlie sat across from her, his silence heavy, but not empty. His eyes, once guarded, now held a flicker of warmth, as if the fog of his past was thinning. She pushed a fresh cup of coffee toward him. He wrapped his hands around it, the gesture familiar, grounding. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. He nodded, but after a moment he spoke, his voice low, rough. "I used to ride with them. Vets MC. After my second tour, I couldn't stay still, couldn't sleep, couldn't be inside without feeling trapped." Katie listened, her presence steady, inviting. "They tried to help, therapy, check-ins, even offered me a place to stay, but the noise, the pity, I couldn't take it, so I walked, no plan, just away." She leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Why tonight? Why here?" A faint chuckle escaped him, more breath than sound, carrying the weight of memory. "I just wanted to be warm. Saw the lights, smelled the coffee, thought I'd charge my phone, sit for a bit." His eyes met hers unguarded. "But you didn't look at me like I was broken or dangerous. You just saw me." Katie blinked back the sting in her eyes, swallowing the ache in her chest. Charlie reached into his jacket, pulling out a small, tarnished object. He slid it across the table, a bronze star, scratched and worn but heavy with meaning. "Never showed anyone this," he said. "Kept it in my sock for 2 years. Forgot it was even there." Katie touched it carefully, her voice soft. "You should wear it." He smiled, a real one this time. "Don't need to anymore." He glanced out the window at the endless row of bikes. They remembered me, he whispered, and now I remember myself. By morning, the storm had passed, but the diner buzzed with new energy. The windows fogged from the steam of coffee and the breath of whispered conversations. Locals trickled in, some for eggs, others drawn by the story already spreading like wildfire. The mayor's assistant arrived, clipboard in hand, jotting notes. A reporter from the local paper sat in a corner booth, scribbling furiously. Outside, the motorcycles remained, a gleaming sea of chrome and leather, standing watch. Charlie had settled at a table by the window, sunlight brushing his hands. He didn't speak much, but he didn't try to leave either. Then something shifted. A regular, who'd grumbled earlier about strays, stood and approached Charlie. "Didn't know who you were," he said, voice low, raw. "I was wrong." He offered his hand. Charlie took it, wordless. Others followed, leaving gift cards, a note for Katie's son's school fundraiser, even a firefighter covering the next round of meals for good judgment. "Hi," Jerry, flushed and fidgeting, managed a gruff, "You handled that well," to Katie. She didn't reply, didn't need to. The diner was full, every seat taken, every heart aware of why. Outside, a boy, maybe 12, stood wide-eyed beside a bike. A biker knelt, smiling. "That man in there? He fixed things no one else could, including us." The boy nodded, awe settling in his gaze. Inside, Katie poured another coffee for Charlie, the man who no longer felt invisible. That evening, after the last pie was served and the chairs stacked, Katie stepped into the cool air. The lot was empty now, save for puddles reflecting the street lamp's glow. She held the envelope, not for the money but for the note inside. She'd read it once, then again, its words sinking deep. Gratitude for seeing a man, not a shadow. Katie's phone vibrated against the counter, its soft hum cutting through the quiet of the now empty diner. She glanced at the screen, her tired eyes catching the glow of a text from her sister. "Saw you on the news. Dad would have been so proud." The words tugged at her heart, pulling a faint smile to her lips as she stood alone in Darla's diner, the place where she'd spent 5 years pouring coffee and scraping by to cover her son's medical bills. She tucked the phone into her apron pocket, her gaze drifting toward the horizon where the final motorcycle had vanished into the fading light. The rumble of their engines still echoed faintly in her mind, like a distant storm that had passed but left the air charged with something new. Not long before, Charlie had slipped out, just as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple. He hadn't made a fuss, hadn't asked for a lift, or lingered for goodbyes. He'd simply stood near the counter, his weathered hands tucked into the pockets of his threadbare jacket, and given her a single nod. "I think I'll go home now," he'd said, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight that didn't need explanation. Katie hadn't pressed him about where home was. Something in his eyes, those pale, haunted eyes that had seen too much, told her he'd recognize it when he found it. She'd watched him shuffle out into the evening, his silhouette blending into the dusk, and a part of her hoped he'd find peace there, wherever it was. Inside the diner, the neon open sign still buzzed faintly in the window, casting a warm red glow across the checkered floor. For years, this place had been her battleground, where she fought exhaustion and worry with every forced smile and refilled mug. She'd served countless strangers here, her hands steady despite the ache in her heart, always carrying the memory of her father's lessons about kindness, lessons he'd lived until his heart gave out. But today, the diner had given something back, something she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the crowd that had gathered or the story that had spread like wildfire through the town. It was the feeling deep in her chest that her small act of compassion had rippled outward, touching lives she'd never know. She took a slow breath, the scent of stale coffee and fried onions lingering in the air, and stepped back inside, turning the lock on the door with a soft click. The silence felt heavier now, but not oppressive, more like a pause, a moment to hold on to before the world rushed back in. As she moved to clear the last of the tables, her eyes caught on something she hadn't noticed before. A folded napkin resting on the table by the window, where Charlie had sat nursing his coffee for hours. Her fingers hesitated before picking it up, as if it might carry more weight than it seemed. She unfolded it carefully, revealing shaky handwriting scrawled across the thin paper. You didn't just let me sit, you let me feel human again. The words hit her like a quiet thunderclap, stirring something deep and unspoken. She stood there, napkin in hand, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and humility. She thought of Charlie, a man who'd carried the scars of war and loss, who'd walked into her diner seeking shelter from the rain and found something more. She thought of her father, whose generosity had shaped her, and how he'd always believed a single kind act could outshine the darkest storm. Katie folded the napkin gently and slipped it into her pocket, a keepsake of a day that had changed her, even if she couldn't yet name how. She glanced once more at the horizon, now swallowed by night, and felt a quiet certainty that the echoes of today would carry on louder than she could imagine.